Hello and welcome to Double Feature Reviews. I'm Libby.
I'm David.
And today we are talking about Marie Antoinette and The Favorite. It's Queen time. David, I know that you'd already seen The Favorite before because we watched it together in theaters.
That's right. We saw that when it came out. So I think that's the only time I've seen The Favorite pretty recently. I saw Marie Antoinette on home video not too long after it came out, probably pre-2010. And I think I've seen it maybe 2 or 3 times since then. So this might be viewing number 4.
Yeah, I had just seen The Favorite the one time in theaters with you, and shockingly, I'd actually never seen Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette. This is shocking because if you don't know, I was a French major and my focus was the early modern Versailles period.
Have you seen any other Sofia Coppola movies?
That's the other thing. I don't think I've seen any other Sofia Coppola movies.
Interesting. Have you seen any other Yorgos Lanthimos movies?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I haven't seen The Lobster.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Poor Things.
I have added Yorgos Lanthimos' film The Killing of a Sacred Deer as a potential movie that we might watch for our spooky Halloween movies.
Yeah, I was about to say, is it yucky?
It's not that yucky.
Okay.
It's well composed in that I think one thing that Yorgos is so good at is remembering that you can say something is happening in front of the camera and the audience will believe you.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to show it to them?
You could just do something that has no special effect. For example, to spoil a random Yorgos Lanthimos movie, you could have a movie where you say that someone is dead and then suddenly they sit up alive. And the audience will believe you. You don't need to do a fancy special effect for that. You can tell that he has theater training because he understands the power of image and direction.
Is Killing of a Sacred Deer his first English language film?
That's a great question.
Is it not even in English?
It is in English. Okay. And I guess it is in fact his first English language film. So I put it on our list as a pairing with The Witch, or The Vavitch, as it is often referred to. And I think it's a good kind of comparison where it's kind of scary for sure, and it does have some occasional moments of gore, things that unpleasant images, but it's not like jump scare or truly icky.
Okay. I will say regarding Sofia Coppola, I have seen like the first 15 or 20 minutes of Tokyo.
Lost in Translation?
Lost in Translation, thank you. Yeah, that was at your house.
Oh, okay.
But when we were dating.
Yeah?
I think your family got it from Netflix, and I did my classic eat dinner with the family whilst watching a film, and then the film has that much time to convince me to watch the rest of it, or else I will go to sleep.
Yes. You got to watch out for that when you're watching movies with Libby.
Sometimes it's bedtime.
It happens. It happens. Yeah, I've seen Sofia Coppola's entire body of work. I'm a big fan of Sofia Coppola, and Lost in Translation is definitely her most famous movie. I don't think it's her best movie.
I think Marie Antoinette might be more famous than Lost in Translation.
That's an interesting question. I think, honestly, now that's true. I mean, we're going to talk about it, I'm sure, but, this is definitely a film whose reputation has improved a lot since it came out, really in the last decade. And now it's really starting to get some attention, really well-deserved attention, frankly. And Lost in Translation, for a variety of reasons, its reputation is sliding down fast.
Mm-hmm. And what is your title for the series, the double feature, these 2 movies together? How would you introduce them?
Yeah, it's long, so offensively long, perhaps. I have beautiful pictures of real humans being bad monarchs. It's a very accurate title. It hits on the things that are great and interesting about these movies, but there are also things that people know, that they're incredibly attractive and have amazing photography and do a great job of visual storytelling, that they are powerful in how they represent these big, important people from history in a way that both is believable, that makes sense with the historical record, and that really presents them in a authentic light where they are understandable and imperfect. And they're also, and I think this sometimes get lost in the shuffle because they're not really political movies, but they do very effectively show the evils of absolute monarchy and really subtly, without being in your face about it, make effective systemic critiques of that. So that's a powerful combination.
My title is much shorter, you'll all be happy to hear. And it references the thing that made me pair these two films together. So I'm calling this duo Anachronism Done Right. Because in these films do have several anachronistic elements. I think that was one of the reasons why people didn't like Marie Antoinette when it first came out.
That's right.
But I think both of these directors are doing the anachronism intentionally, coherently, and with vision. Whereas in a lot of historical films, there frequently is anachronism, which appears to be a product of sloppiness.
Yeah, I totally agree that the effective use of anachronism and the innovative use of anachronism is not only very interesting about the movies, but really makes them better. And I think that's a really something that is different than a lot of movies. In some ways, I would say, like, bad movies walked so that these good movies could run. Because the films are partially commenting on the history of casual anachronism and sort of not necessarily defending it, but acknowledging that audiences don't particularly care or know what exactly is historically accurate, and that it's an effective way to communicate with an audience to intentionally draw a connection to a historical thing to an anachronistic modern thing. So, it is partially a commentary on the history of these bad movies, and it partially takes advantage of those movies to make its own stylized point.
Yeah. Maybe this is something you want to save for later, but do you think that the favorite's use of anachronism is based on Marie Antoinette's use of it?
Yeah. Well, part of the anachronism in Marie Antoinette is the dance sequences. And I guess that's kind of the big anachronistic thing in The Favorite. There's this really highlighted dance sequence.
Well, I think the biggest anachronistic element is the costumes.
Well, of course, you're way more qualified to comment on that than
Well, even you would know that not everyone in the entire royal court of 1715 was wearing exclusively black and white.
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know what colors people were wearing in 1704. So
okay,
nope.
Well, it's true.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. But sure, no, that doesn't, I think, stand out to me in the same way that it does to you. To be frank, some of the anachronism is obvious, and some of it is not. In Marie Antoinette, I mean, it's a little bit harder because Marie Antoinette is supposed to, in theory, stick a bit closer to an historical script, some events that actually happened. And, Marie Antoinette has a lot of lines that are real quotes from history.
Or at least reported quotes from history.
Very fair.
People love to lie about Marie Antoinette.
That couldn't be more true. But Marie Antoinette definitely has a lot more of intentional and aggressive anachronism to back...
I actually think you're underestimating the anachronism in The Favorite in ways that I just mentioned. That the costumes are not historically accurate.
Well, I wouldn't call that aggressive anachronism. Those are not things that are meant to call out to a casual observer that somebody who's not particularly informed about the time period would immediately recognize. I mean, Marie Antoinette has pictures of Converse shoes from the 80s. It has music.
So, I know that the Converse shoes appeared in the marketing for Marie Antoinette. And I was looking for it. Okay, so there are Converse. No one puts on a pair of Converse shoes, but they are in the background. Okay.
That's right.
Well, I was looking for them, and I didn't see them. So I would not call that obvious anachronism.
That's fair. It maybe not obvious on the screen. So that's true. So I think that the Marie Antoinette is definitely more famous for being anachronistic, and like you're saying, partially because that barrier had already been broken, and partially because it was more about the marketing of Marie Antoinette. It was supposed to be the historical movie for young people, which is actually what caused this whole problem with the movie in the beginning, which is that the movie is so much more than that, and the marketing just couldn't accept that was true.
Well, also, and people hate young people, so...
Yeah, that turned out to be a bigger problem than they expected.
Yeah, and if The Favorite is ancient history to you guys and you want a more modern example, I think both of these have led to a lot of the success of Bridgerton, which is a highly anachronistic but constructing a coherent world that appeals to a lot of people.
Yeah, I do think that's an interesting comparison. I don't know, is the Queen in Bridgerton supposed to be connected to any real queen in history? Okay.
Yes. Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III.
Okay, all right. Right, oh yeah, that's right, George III. It's been a while since I watched Bridgerton, but now I'm remembering it now. Yeah, he's in it. Okay, you're right. So yeah, I do think that's a good comparison. I think, again, Bridgerton, I don't think really expects its audience to see a lot of anachronism other than the casting. Now, obviously, there's a lot out there. And I think their audience is...
Well, I think some of the hairstyles are so ridiculous that I think that the casual viewer would be like, I don't think so.
I do not think... I think the casual viewer is completely incapable of telling if it's what the advice from Marie Antoinette's hairdresser or Shonda Rhimes' own invention. I think the casual viewer is totally incapable of
there is a whole industry of people talking about the historical accuracy of Bridgerton.
Okay.
So at this point, I think
that's true.
Anyone who is consuming any media in the Bridgerton macro flow is aware.
I think people have discovered this and are kind of surprised about it. I think they knew it wasn't perfectly historically accurate. Yeah, I think people are a lot more aware that this might be an intentional thing than they were at the beginning. I mean, I think Bridgerton also just doesn't have the budget, frankly, probably, that Marie Antoinette or The Favourite did, and so had to play that game.
Anyway, now that we've said an awful lot about both of these films and also a different piece of media, if you haven't seen either of these films, or if it's been a while, David is here to refresh you on the plots.
All right, so Marie Antoinette is a historical drama where a young Austrian princess tries to fit into her new role as the future Queen of France. But the royal family's immaturity and the ancient regime's corruption pull her fate towards tragedy. The Favourite is also a historical drama. In the English royal palace at the start of the 18th century, Queen Anne's two favorite girlfriends, advisors, and lovers face off in a battle for the Queen's affection and the fate of the nation. One thing, I don't know if this is the right time to do it, but I feel like what we have, I feel sometimes unfair to the people listening to the podcast who maybe didn't watch the movies. So I maybe we should say what happens for each movie. We'll say at some point what happens at the beginning of the movie and what happens at the end of the movie. I think that's something that people would benefit from in the framework of our discussion. But, maybe we want to do the cast first or whatever.
No, let's do what you just said.
Okay, sure.
Do you want to do both? Do you want me to do one and you to do the other?
You do one and I'll do the other.
Okay, which one do you want me to do?
Well, I guess Marie Antoinette comes first.
Okay, so Marie Antoinette, just like what's sort of going on in the first scene and what's going on in the last scene?
That's basically it, yeah.
Okay, first scene, Marie Antoinette, a 15-year-old young lady, is in some palace in Austria. I don't think it's Schönbrunn. And is informed by her mother, Maria Theresa, that it's time for Austria and France to stop warring, as they have been doing since the movie The Favourite. And Marie's marriage to the Dauphin, or the heir to the French throne.
The Crown Prince.
That's a German term.
It's an English term.
That we took from German. The Prince of Wales is not the Crown Prince, and that's...
I think he is.
And that's they don't use the term Crown Prince, and that's the only English-speaking country where we have a monarchy.
Well, for those of us that are not as aristocratically informed as you, hopefully that's helpful.
I said heir. People know what that means. People know what heir means more than they know what Crown Prince means.
I think they have.
I think a lot of people think Crown Prince just means prince. I think most people don't know the difference. But yeah, in Austria, the Crown Prince is the heir. In France, during the Ancien Régime, he was referred to as the Dauphin, which does mean dolphin.
Just because they're fancy and cool?
I don't know why they picked this.
Because it's cool. People love dolphins.
And the last scene is of Marie Antoinette, Louis, her husband, and their children.
Now partially united as a happy family.
Not sure. The family unit is no longer the problem.
Now a mostly united family unit.
Being led away from Versailles as the sun sets to their eventual beheading, but it's actually going to take a while.
We got to get into some real awkward trials first.
Okay, now you do The Favourite.
Okay. I think at the beginning of The Favourite, we see Sarah and Anne and sort of establish their relationship. I think that's our opening. So at the beginning of The Favourite, we see Queen Anne, in poor health, to some extent, both physical and mental, reigning monarch of England, being tended to by her close friend and very powerful noblewoman, Sarah Marlborough. And
I don't think Marlborough is her last name.
Oh, Churchill, my mistake. Sarah Churchill's her name.
Yeah, Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough.
Sarah Churchill, that's right. They're the first Churchills, or the second Churchills, actually.
Oh, you've seen the first Churchills?
I have seen the first Churchills. Have you seen it?
I have not, but I'm familiar with the costumes. Is it actually good?
It's actually pretty good.
Okay.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
If you like a studio drama from the mid-century.
Oh yeah, if you like BBC, I like a lot of BBC costume dramas. Sometimes they are a bit dry for me and a bit personal. But the first Churchills is not in that. It's one of their kind of big, bold, with a lot of great drama and a lot of great history in it. So I do recommend the first Churchills. So at the beginning of The Favourite, we see the Queen Anne and Mrs. Churchill establishing their friendship, and we see just how dependent Queen Anne is on Sarah for everything that needs to happen in the palace. And at the end of The Favourite,
pretty iconic.
Sarah is gone, now banished to Europe, and it's the new favorite of Queen Anne who is postured below her, rubbing her legs in an extremely submissive way.
As they are surrounded by rabbits.
That's right. Are they surrounded by rabbits in the opening scene too?
I think they're in a hallway. Or maybe they're in Anne's bedroom.
I think they're surrounded by rabbits
and they're not surrounded. I believe the rabbits are in their cages.
Oh, I see.
And Anne says, say hello to the rabbits. And Sarah's like, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that.
That's right. At the end of the movie, Anne discovers that the new favorite really isn't as loving and affectionate for her or her rabbits. And she catches her sort of torturing one on the ground.
Does she catch her?
Yes, she does. She does see her from the bed doing it. And her reaction is when she, in her own way, not able to fully process that due to the problems she's having, realizes that she's replaced someone who, well, she's now has a favorite that she can't trust to do the right thing.
Yeah, I remember when we saw that in theaters, I was just so horrified that I was about to watch a rabbit die, that I didn't pay attention to the sightlines of the character in the next shot.
Well, like you were talking about at the beginning, if you go see a Yorgos Lanthimos movie, frankly, we could not have been better treated.
Yeah.
It's clear that Yorgos is trying to play nice because he knows that people are going to see this movie. Often his movies are filled with significantly disturbing imagery. Not necessarily graphically gore, but really unpleasant to look at. That's the idea.
So hold on to that thought for a moment, because now we're going to go in depth with Marie Antoinette. This is a 2006 film directed and written by Sofia Coppola. It stars Kirsten Dunst as Marie Antoinette, or Maria Antonia, as she starts out the film. Jason Schwartzman as Louis Auguste, the Dauphin, later Louis XVI. Rip Torn as Louis XV. Steve Coogan as Ambassador Merci, who is the Austrian ambassador to France and is sort of guiding Marie and corresponding with Marie's mother, Maria Theresa of Austria. Judy Davis as the Comtesse de Noailles. She is the Dame d'honneur, or chief lady-in-waiting to the Queen. And Tom Hardy, in not a particularly large role, he plays Roman, who I don't think his name is ever said in the film. He appears in 1 or 1.5 scenes, but we mention him because he has already appeared on this podcast in scenes of a sexual nature. We have maybe picked the 2 most obscure Tom Hardy films to start off with.
Oh, that's an interesting point. I think that's probably true.
Yeah, we found him. We found the most obscure Tom Hardy films. And additionally, another double feature double of a new kind. We have the same character appearing from a different film, and that is Emperor Joseph II of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Here he's played by Danny Huston. You also saw him in Amadeus. So he heard too many notes over in Austria, so he needs to come over to France to visit his sister to get a break from Mozart.
Yeah, he seems to be a lot more chill in France when he's not around his own court. Trying to have a good time, mainly.
I think he's trying to get his sister to lose her virginity, which is maybe not the most fun errand one could possibly have.
He's trying to have a good time. It's just not going great. This film was an adaptation of a book, Marie Antoinette, The Journey by Antonia Fraser, pretty well-known historical writer. It was originally supposed to be the adaptation of another book.
Is the Fraser book fiction or nonfiction?
It is categorized as nonfiction.
Okay.
It was originally supposed to be based on another book, Marie Antoinette, The Last Queen of France, but then they switched it at the last second. Both of these books are considered nonfiction. Both take a pretty open and flexible view of the historical
narrative
fact.
approach. Okay.
Originally, this was supposed to be Sofia Coppola's first big movie before Lost in Translation. But she really struggled to write the screenplay. There's a lot of historical facts and people and ideas to put together. So she started creating a sort of smaller project about a person who takes a trip to Japan as kind of a distraction from her hard project of Marie Antoinette. And it turns out that movie would be a lot easier to make. So they did that one first. And it's really the success of Lost in Translation, which was an immediate critical and to some extent commercial success, that gave Sofia Coppola the blank check for Marie Antoinette. Now,
Which I think she needed, because this is also way more expensive than Lost in Translation. And would they have given her as big of a budget? Yeah.
definitely not. So it's a $40 million budget, which isn't that much, frankly, but it's a lot of money for 2006. And no, I don't think that she was going to be able to get that much industry support. And, this movie had a big budget, not just in terms of the photography and the production, but also in terms of the marketing and the way that it was sort of pushed. This movie was pushed hard. And that's partially because Sofia Coppola had so much success with Lost in Translation. I'm not sure that was really the right thing for the project. And I think there's a lot of people who have that thought looking back. Sofia said that she never wanted to make a big historical effort. She said, I wanted to really try focusing on I wanted to really focus on trying to make an impressionistic telling from her point of view. So many of the stories we know are perceptions of other people about her. So her goal was to have a first-person narrative from Marie Antoinette, not to produce a big, flashy costume epic. But the money came in, and the demand for that type of production came in. The film was shot in 3 months, from January to April of 2005. The post-production process took over a year before it was finally released in May of 2006.
Were there any particular problems they ran into, or just lots of little ones?
I don't know. There's not that much documentation about the production process. I don't think there was some big crisis that came up, and that's a long time, but it's not that long. It happens. What a lot of effort was put into was the marketing for this movie. Throughout this year, building up to the release, this is one of the most heavily advertised films out there. And there was this big push that this was the movie that was going to make young people start liking historical epics again.
Had there been a recent flop of a historical epic?
The historical epic genre is a lot less prominent now than it was 50 or 70 years ago in film. I think that we all know that. And that trend was well established by this time. And so there was sort of this idea that the problem was that historical epics were made by stuffy old men. And now we had a fun California girl here to make the movie. And so now young girls were going to like historical epics again, and everything was going to be fine for the film industry. That's not what happened. The movie was not a huge success commercially, and it was not particularly well received critically. It's kind of hard to draw that line, because I think a lot of the problem is that the movie was marketed terribly, and it was marketed to be a blockbuster when it's not. And so even critics, sometimes praising the actual filmmaking itself, would say, but this isn't going to be some big blockbuster. Why are they marketing the movie like this? And no one could really come up with the answer to that question. There was some pushback about the historical anachronisms, especially from inside France. The movie was filmed at Versailles on location and got a lot of special privileges. And I think the French film community was really hoping that this was going to make movies about France cool again. And that's not something that happened immediately. So, as a result, this became known as one of history's big movie flops, commercially and critically. I don't think that really checks out in the numbers. The movie more than made its budget back. It only has a 52% return on investment, so it wasn't some smashing success, nor was it a total failure. It wasn't received particularly well by critics. It only got 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, so below certified fresh. It still has a very poor IMDb rating, 6.5 on 126,000 votes.
That seems unreasonable.
Well, these numbers are ridiculous. This film is a masterpiece, and history is pushing hard in the other direction. And Sofia has talked about it herself. She said, I'm always happy that I get to make what I want to make. I was happy we got to make that movie, but nobody saw it. It was a flop. So, the fact that it's lived on and people talk about it has been really satisfying because so much work went into it. It makes me happy to know that now it's kind of found its way and people enjoy it. And I think she's being modest, frankly. Now the film is very well received. Most people who watch it now have a great time and really enjoy it. And that should have been the case from the beginning. There's really no way around it. A lot of negative reception went into the song I Want Candy.
Which I know is heavily used in the marketing.
That was used in the marketing. People were upset about it, partially from a historical anachronism perspective, partially that people felt like it was sort of minimizing or trivializing the issues. I don't think that's fair at all. I think it's making them accessible and clear. And the song I Want Candy has a long history of being kind of a joke song and not very good movies. We've all seen those movies. And I think the Marie Antoinette purists, or whatever term we want to give to these people, were not happy that such a solemn idea was being treated so casually. Now, if it had been immediately really received by audience and made $100 million, they probably would have said it was a brilliant move. Which shows that these critics are focusing on how do I make industry bosses happy rather than reviewing what makes a movie good or bad. You mentioned the connection to Amadeus. So it's kind of fun to think about some of those connections. Like the plot of Amadeus is in part driven around the fact that Joseph has banned the play The Marriage of Figaro.
Yes, that was an important event in the French court, but didn't actually come up in the film. It gets really briefly mentioned by the Duchesse de Polignac. And I wasn't totally sure if she was referring to the Beaumarchais play or the Mozart opera.
I'm pretty sure she's referring to the Beaumarchais play because it was banned in France in 1778 until Marie Antoinette basically declared that she really wanted to see it. So now it was legal in 1784. So I think that's what they're referring to. That's the most famous connection between Marie Antoinette
There
and
was a pretty quick turnaround between the play and the opera. I mean, Mozart's dead by 1791, so... and Marie Antoinette did really advocate for this play, possibly eventually to her downfall, because the main point of The Marriage of Figaro is how repulsive and
abusive,
sexually vile the aristocracy is, and claims of sexual misconduct were thrown at largely Marie Antoinette, to a lesser extent Louis XVI. And that's one of the things that's basically completely unjustified. There are definitely things to criticize Marie Antoinette about. That's not one of them.
Yeah, I mean, she was probably engaged in a lot less sexual misconduct than anyone else at the court of Versailles. I mean, she wasn't famously extremely faithful in her marriage or anything like that.
We actually have no evidence of her having a sexual relationship with someone other than her husband. It's unclear whether she did or not. There is no solid evidence that she did.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true for most people at Versailles. There's no solid evidence that any of those people were engaged in affairs.
Most of those other people have much less recorded about them. And the other previous members of the French royal family most definitely have records of their sexual affairs.
They're actually very well documented.
The Louis XIV and XV, their wives pretty quickly stepped back from public life. And it was their mistresses, Madame de Montespan for Louis XIV, and Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry for Louis XV were the sort of like reigning female figures at Versailles. Yeah,
I mean, that ends up being a big plot point in Marie Antoinette, that there is now a formal position of mistress, which, as you're saying, is actually, they kind of act like it's a new thing that just started with
Du Barry.
With Du Barry, but of course it's an old French law. Pretty old, actually.
Yeah, and the inclusion of Madame du Barry, that wasn't my favorite part. I wasn't totally sure why specifically she was there. It did sort of lend to the, showing the lechery of Louis XV, and it contributed to the atmosphere of everyone's having sex except for Marie and Louis. But I kind of thought that given the whole arc of the film, I feel like we focus a little bit too much on Madame du Barry.
Yeah, I think this movie is largely conversant with the other big Marie Antoinette film adaptation, the 1938 adaptation with John Barrymore, and I can't remember who plays Marie in that one, which, isn't a bad movie, isn't intended to have the same level of artistic or dramatic ambition. It's a traditional historical epic. But it's interesting...
Norma Shearer,
thank you. It's interesting because in that one, or in this version, we're presented with a version of the rivalry between Marie and Du Barry in a way that basically matches the historical record. Where in the 1938 version, that's not true. And when they have their fated meeting, they just end up in a screaming match with each other and hurling all sorts of obscenities at each other. So I think it's, to some extent, trying to bookmark these historical events that people have heard about in the Marie Antoinette story and give them context. And that's one of the most famous stories about Marie Antoinette. I mean, there are many people at Versailles today is actually an incredibly brilliant and witty thing to say in that situation. It's actually a perfect thing for me to say because there are so many people that she has to see today. So many. And so it's definitely a famous historical note, so they can't totally eliminate it. It's also fun because Asia Argento is, of course, the daughter of a famous director, as is Sofia Coppola. Jason Schwartzman, also the son of a famous director. This movie is like a reunion of famous directors' kids. And when you go down the list, I think there's, I believe, 5 or 6 very well-known directors whose children feature as actors in this film.
It may also be trying to tie in with the historical narrative about Versailles. Right now, Marie Antoinette is like the big lady that everyone cares about, who lived in Versailles. A lot of that is due to this film. And in the 1930s, that was the same. But in the intermediate time, a lot more media has been made about Louis XV's mistresses than Marie Antoinette. They've been considered more interesting figures. So this could be seen as a handing off from the people who are really interested in the mistresses to Marie Antoinette.
I think, again, that's very good analysis. And to some extent, I think the film feels kind of forced into including this storyline, which is true. Maybe a good criticism of the film is that it is a bit slow to get started. And the interesting parts about Marie and her journey and her decisions come later. And we do have to spend too much time on Kid Marie and Kid Jason Schwartzman. I'm not going to call him Louis because I don't want to get confused there. But not being able to do anything and not having any control of our lives, which is part of the story, but doesn't really make for very interesting things to see on film.
Yeah, and I don't know if that has to do with this film being marketed towards young people who have to learn about the French Revolution, at least to a certain extent, in school, and thus kind of know something. They've at least heard the name Marie Antoinette, whereas you don't get a lot of coverage of Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry in your typical American high school education.
Yeah, I wonder what that's like in the French education.
One thing that I really liked about this film, and that I think this film is uniquely good at, is what Coppola is doing with her transitional shots and how much mood setting and occasionally cheekiness she's able to work into what are really there to be a pause, a beat before the next plot element begins, or to signal a transition of time or location, and how much sort of content she's able to get into her transition shots. One of the ones that I remember most vividly is after Louis has sort of had his sexual awakening, the transition shots are of all of the fountains of Versailles coming back to life.
Yeah, I think Sofia Coppola might be the director of our generation who is most skilled with image. And she produces, in her whole body of work, very imagistic films, meaning that the viewer's experience is defined by seeing images. And the impression that image, just like she said it, we mentioned in the opening, the impression that those images give to us. We do get dialogue, we do get exposition that happens, but when you watch the movie, you're not focused really on the things that people say. In some ways, I would compare this script to I Am Legend, where a lot of what people are saying is very small, very minimal, and very obvious. Almost intentionally a caricature or a stereotype. I think back to the two shrewd court ladies that are always around making some sort of biting comment. And a lot of times
the aunts,
yes.
Shirley Henderson and Molly Shannon.
That's exactly right. They are not really often saying something very witty, but they're saying something that really effectively establishes the emotions and the themes of the story. And then the things that make the movie really interesting and deep to experience are the way that the images tell the story. And, Sofia Coppola is just one of the best photographers out there. She finds ways to photograph things that look really beautiful and are really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I didn't immediately think of I Am Legend. I immediately thought of Gosford Park. I Am Legend has way more scenes with basically no dialogue in them. This one, like Gosford Park, has a lot of scenes of dialogue, but where the dialogue doesn't seem that important, and it seems like both directors sort of said to the actors, start saying your lines, I'll move the camera around, and we'll get some of it. As opposed to the way shots are normally done, which is, okay, I'm going to stick the camera in front of your faces, we're going to deliver the lines, the point of this shot is to capture the lines.
Yeah, it's interesting because Gosford Park and Marie Antoinette had such different styles of filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Gosford Park, just like you're saying, is a setup where we establish the scene, we rehearse it, we kind of sit a camera down, maybe one that's spinning around the room or something, and then the actors just do the scene, and they're often expected to do longer than they were planning, and then it's going to be edited down and cut. Whereas Sofia Coppola has a very, not necessarily controlling, but a very active style of direction. She is behind the camera, telling her actors how to emote and what to think on a moment-by-moment level. Mm-hmm. So Sofia really has a more traditional style of film director, of the conducting the director, the coaching director, unlike Robert Altman, who does have a very hands-off approach.
So you think she was mostly building the shots in the scripting phase and then just manifesting them in the editing, as opposed to Altman, who is sort of chill about the scripting phase and will just capture what we capture and then develops it in the editing room?
That's really perfect analysis. I suppose I should mention that would be the storyboarding phase, not the scripting phase. But yes.
I do plays.
Fair. Very fair. I guess I don't do storyboards for plays. Maybe do storyboards for plays, play directors. Think about it.
I mean, a lot of plays were written 200 plus years ago.
Well, the storyboards are drawn on paper, so this shouldn't be a problem.
I'm not gonna give Shakespeare notes.
I see. Well, you got a storyboard, what it's going to look like on your stage, so it's not notes for Shakespeare, it's notes for you.
The Elizabethan stage was actually much less interested in what it looked like.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
It's a really text-based medium.
It's true. I mean, there's a lot more abstraction as well. We do get to see Sofia's cinematic trademark. All of her movies feature sunlight shining through leaves. Mm-hmm. And we get that in the hunting party scene when Marie is trying to be a good girlfriend and do what Louis wants to do, and tries to give them all such a nice picnic. What was the ambassador complaining about there? I mean, truly, come on.
Yeah, I think this film does definitely do some work to illustrate it, but I think it in fact falls short of showing how rigorous and oppressive the rituals at Versailles were for the royal family.
I mean, Sofia tries to put that on camera. I think she's trying. You want her to maybe make it a little bit darker. She kind of has some fun with it.
Yeah, too much fun.
Okay.
This sort of ritual nature of the royal family's lifestyle was established by Louis XIV. Early in his...
Rip Torn, Jason Schwartzman's dad.
Louis XIV.
So Jason Schwartzman's granddad.
So you could not be more wrong in the most hilarious way. So Louis XVI is not the son of Louis XV.
Awkward.
He's the grandson. So Louis XVI's father died. He predeceased him. So that's why Louis XV seems so much older. It's because he is, in fact, his grandfather. Louis XV is not the son or the grandson of Louis XIV. He is the great-grandson of Louis XIV. So first things first, Louis XIV
really
lived
old.
fucking forever. He's the longest reigning king of France. He reigned for 71 years. He started when he was a child.
This is the Sun King.
Yes.
The famous one.
I think, honestly, Louis XVI is more famous nowadays as the husband of Marie Antoinette. But if you want to actually understand French history, it's more important to know about Louis XIV. And that helps you understand what a big deal Louis XIV was. Like, there were the majority of the population of France at the end of the 16th century couldn't even remember there being a different king.
Of course, he's not in this movie.
He is not in this movie. But he did establish all of these rituals of power that occurred at Versailles. And that's because pretty early in his reign, there was a attempted revolt by the nobles called La Fronde. He managed to suppress this and then really took it out on the aristocracy. This is why he built Versailles. He made them all live there so that he could keep an eye on them. He made every part of his life a demonstration of the royal family's wealth and power. The king and queen both had the levée, which is the dressing. So you get dressed in public, and people can come watch. And people would come watch the king get naked and put all of his fancy clothes on. This was so oppressive that even Louis XIV, who organized it and understood how important it was, couldn't handle it. So you see the Petit Trianon, which is a small palace on the grounds of Versailles. I don't think they make it clear enough that the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's house, is like a mile away from Versailles. It's in the gardens of Versailles. It's not a separate estate. Between Versailles and the Petit Trianon is the Grand Trianon, which is basically the king's vacation house. And you're like, why do you need a vacation house half a mile from your normal house? And it's because when the royal family was living there, they didn't have to deal with all of the court rituals. And so Louis XIV was willing to put up with all of this ritualism, inconvenience, and invasion of privacy because he understood how important it was to control the nobility. By the time you get to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they don't really have any sense of this. The nobility has been pretty squashed for their entire lives.
Until soon, but we'll get there.
Until soon, that Marie Antoinette found this extremely oppressive. It's hard to diagnose historical figures with diseases, but Marie Antoinette may have developed an eating disorder like anorexia, or possibly a binge restrict cycle, because she really didn't like eating publicly. She found it humiliating. And I think they really focused the oppression of Versailles on the fact that the marriage isn't consummated. And I do think it's important to spend time on that, but the film is also 2 hours, and you could have made it 10 minutes longer and it probably would have been okay.
I don't know about that, but please continue. I think it's 10 minutes too long. It's one of the few critiques that have.
Yeah, well, maybe you could have cut something else out.
Fair.
To indicate that even if she had sexually performed, there still would have been a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think that's a very accurate historical point. I mean, it makes for maybe a less engaging dramatic narrative. We want to have one problem that we sort of have to overcome, and then we can focus on that problem. I do, I think the main way, like you said, is that we do try to show this on camera, is the mostly played for laughs dressing scene where she's caught out in the cold naked and can't get her clothes for modesty or practical reasons. I think these scenes are interesting because they do show the other side of this courtier relationship that's going to end up being a big deal in The Favorite, which is why would a noble want to be the servant? Why would the noble want to be someone whose job it is to hand someone some gown? And partially it's just prestigious because you're around the king, but it also means that you have a job and you get to live in the palace for free.
You get a salary.
As a salary, and your whole job is in the morning you hand the queen one piece of clothes, and then you have the rest of the day for yourself. Yeah. That's a good job. People would want to have that job.
Well, also, this was royal positions was the only way the nobility could earn money. Louis XIV established that if you had a noble title, you were not allowed to earn money in trade, and if you did, you forfeited your title.
I mean, they were mostly earning money from taxing their peasants. That didn't exactly...
increasingly less so, because they couldn't go back to their estates to manage them. They had to live at Versailles.
But you also talked about how the act of dressing and wearing all these fancy clothes was a big deal. Again, that might sound kind of odd to a modern audience. I mean, to go see someone put on a bunch of nice clothes, what's a big deal? But the fact of the matter is that nice clothes are a huge deal economically at this time. Clothes are a lot harder to make. A lot harder to make. And finding the materials for the type of clothes that people are making is way harder. And so when you see someone who's wearing a fancy dress, this is like see someone who's driving, a Ferrari or, lives in a mansion. This is a sign of massive wealth, just the difference in the way people are dressed. It's not like you wear a nice suit and it looks basically like any other nice suit. There's also a few scenes in this, or at least shots in this movie, that I always want to get Libby's opinion on, which are uncomfortable corset commentary humor. And this is going to come up again.
Oh, did they do that?
I think there's a little bit of this. So I want to get this out of the open and get your opinion. Yeah. So, Libby, When we read these books about history and see the movies about history, they talk a lot about how women had to wear these really uncomfortable corsets that were dehumanizing and painful and impractical. Now, I also happen to be around people in the historical costuming review who are constantly telling me that that's not true. That actually corsets are fine and they're a perfectly legitimate way to wear and no one really minded and it was fine. Which one is it, Libby?
So if you make it correctly and you wear it correctly and it fits you, then it's fine. It is totally possible to make an uncomfortable corset. The first corset I made was uncomfortable. I didn't make it right. I'd also like to point out that bras are frequently uncomfortable. We still feel like most people kind of have to wear those. Most people with breasts kind of have to wear those. And if you have a larger chest and you're not wearing a bra, people will notice and think you're kind of sloppy. It's exactly the same thing 200 years ago. Was there a shot or a line where someone mentions corsets being uncomfortable? I will say...
I think there's some comment about how the corsets at Versailles are bad for her. She doesn't like the corsets at Versailles.
So there is actually a special phenomenon going on in the French court at this time. And that is the wearing of the grand habit du corps, the grand habit of the court. So this is a different type of dress. Most of the gowns that are being worn by the time Marie Antoinette is in France are based on what had been the underwear or the loungewear of of Louis XIV's reign. The Grand Habit du Corps is a direct descendant of the formal gowns of Louis XIV's reign. So the main problem with these dresses is that they're very heavy. They're very embellished. They don't have a separate pair of stays and then a dress on top. The primary torso garment is both the support layer and the outer layer in most cases. And also it's cut in kind of a weird way to reveal the shoulders. I don't think Marie Antoinette actually wears this at any point in the film, which I think might be incorrect because I really do think she would have worn it for her wedding. In the wedding dance scene, you do see other women at court dressed in the Grand Habit du Corps. So rumor has it that Louis XIV really liked a shoulder. He was a shoulder man. And he was like, all the ladies at court have to wear an off-the-shoulder dress. So the dress style was off the shoulder and had really voluminous and embellished sleeves. And also all of the fabric was very heavy. So that is unpleasant to wear and can tire you out. So that's what she's talking about with the specific Versailles garments being uncomfortable. Also, generally, the skirt is a separate garment from the torso piece, the bodice. So you can't have the torso supporting the skirts for you.
You meaning like the skirts might normally sort of hang on your torso?
Yeah, so I don't actually know if the Grand Habit du Corps was worn on top of the stays or underneath them. If they're being worn underneath them, then it's just like your your hips are supporting the weight of the skirts, which had a very long train as well. So it's just kind of inconvenient because I have worn dresses with trains. My trains are not very long. Motherfuckers be stepping on them all the time.
Does Marie Antoinette step on de Berry's train when they're walking past each other in a hall?
I think she just sort of bumps into her.
She just bumps her, not a train thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, have I bored you enough with French history? Do you want to move on to the favorite? I know less about the English court at the beginning of the 18th century than I do about the French court at the end of the 18th.
Well, there's not many people I know who know more about late 18th century French court costumes. So there's no one who's more qualified to be here on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
So then moving on, the favorite is a 2018 film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, written by Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara. It stars Olivia Colman as Queen Anne, Emma Stone as Abigail, Rachel Weisz as Lady Sarah, Nicholas Hoult as Harley, the leader of the opposition, James Smith as Godolphin, more dolphin references for some reason, the Prime Minister.
Is that the etymology of Godolphin?
So the lines of the Godolphin barons are based in Cornwall, which does have its own sort of linguistic situation. So this might be a Celtic language thing.
Yep, all those dolphins right off the coast of Cornwall. You go look out on the rocks.
Go, dolphin.
Godolphin. Get out there and dolphin it up.
So yeah, that's the cast for The Favorite. David, how did they make the film?
Yeah, well, so The Favorite was originally conceived in 1998. So this is an old project by Deborah Davis. Deborah Davis had absolutely no prior screenwriting experience. She was studying screenwriting at night school, and she got excited about this story from history.
That counts as experience. If you're in school for it, that counts.
Sure. This was her first major script project. Before she started writing the script, she didn't know anything about Queen Anne or Sarah Churchill or any of this stuff. Her teacher saw her script and said, this is actually really good. This is actually really good. I think this is just a regular script. So it started to make its way around Hollywood, where Yorgos found it. And this is actually the first time that Yorgos directed a film that he didn't write, or his normal partner from his time in Greece, Mr. Philippou, he didn't write it either. So it was good enough that Yorgos was like, wow, I don't even need to make the script. Thanks, Deb. Now, the script changed a lot after Yorgos joined the project. The original script didn't have a lot of the things we see on screen. It didn't have the chapter-based structure, but a lot of the original pieces and the core rivalry was there. This is another production with weird rehearsal history. Famously, Lanthimos brought all of the major actors together and had them rehearse in full days for 3 weeks. And he had them do a bunch of weird stuff. They delivered their lines to each other where they would give them ropes, and they had to tie themselves into knots with the ropes as they were doing their lines. He would create like different patterns of carpeted tiles around the room, and they had to jump from one carpet to another carpet while doing their rooms. He would make them
their lines.
Thank you. While doing their lines, he would make them lie down on the floor and rise around and do weird motions while doing their lines. Rachel Weisz famously said that there was one exercise that involves the actors linking arms on the ground to create a human pretzel. Somebody's butt is in your face is in their butt, and you're saying the lines for a really serious, dramatic scene while doing that. So that's how you make a movie, Libby.
Aside from that last one, most of this sounds like what people think of as bullshit exercises their high school theater teacher makes them do. But you're saying it is actually effective.
According to Yorgos, from what I understand, Yorgos kind of loves that theater bullshit. He's into it.
Well, I mean, I think it got really great performances. And the Oscars agreed.
They knew their lines, probably by the end of it. That helped. But yeah, I do think there are some... And you can tell that actors are, I think, emoting harder than they normally do while they're doing their lines. And I think the goal, from Yorgos' perspective, was to get people to submit fully to direction. So when he shows up and says, when you say this line, you're actually kind of mad about it, in a way that the actor might not fully understand, they just go with it. And I think you can see people diving into their lines more than they do in a typical film. You know, The Favorite is probably the Lanthimos film that is the most naturalistic. And it's actually kind of amazing when you've seen the rest of his films, how, and this is a movie where people basically sort of show up, talk like basically normal people, have a basically normal pace of conversation, and kind of mostly believable things are happening on the screen. A lot of his films are a lot more abstract, and he's famous for this very artificial reading from a phone book style of delivery that he has his actors do for a lot of inane but also very serious moments. So that's not what's happening here, but I think he wanted to get that out in rehearsal. You know, he needs his process. Filming began in March of 2017 at the Hatfield House in Hertfordshire. Have you been to the Hatfield House? I know you've been to Versailles. You've also been to Marie Antoinette's original home in Germany, right? We can talk about that.
Schönbrunn. I've been to Schönbrunn, which for the record is just as fancy as Versailles. Marie didn't spend all of her time at Schönbrunn. She also lived at a different place, which I don't think I've been to, and which I think was also less fancy. So that's where I think maybe that's where they actually shot the opening scene of Marie Antoinette, or maybe they were just doing a mock-up of it. But they definitely wanted to draw a distinction between the palace where she had been living and Versailles. There's not that much of a difference between Schönbrunn and Versailles. Schönbrunn was modeled on Versailles. The Austrians wanted to look as impressive as Louis XIV. Yeah, so I think I went to Hatfield House when I was 10. So I don't really remember that much about it. I do know that the kitchens that you see in a couple of scenes, those are not the Hatfield kitchens, which may have been converted into offices. Those kitchens are at Hampton Court, which I have been to more recently. And while I was there, I had a foot injury. So I actually was in a wheelchair and got the Queen Anne experience.
Amazing.
Although apparently the real one wasn't in a wheelchair.
The imagery in the film, the photography, is very famous for its use of wide angle, and I think we might really want to call it fisheye lenses here. An effect where we see the image almost sort of curving around the edges because it can't quite fit in the square.
Yeah, sort of if you imagine you're filming a room, normally you can only film one wall or two walls. If you're near a corner with a fisheye lens, you can kind of get three of the walls in what looks like a flat image. And some of the shots are done with a full fisheye lens. Other ones aren't fisheye, but are still a very wide angle.
That's right. This fisheye technique has now become one of Lanthimos's trademark techniques, but it originates here in The Favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that he may have been inspired by the rooms, which do tend to be kind of long and skinny.
Well, he said that he wanted to film in Hatfield House because it had all of these big spaces, I might say long spaces like you're saying, where you could really give an image of a lonely person stuck in this big, long expanse. So I think that is a factor. The main reason that they went with this wide-angle fish-eye technique is because they didn't want to use Steadicam, which is, it's kind of like handheld camera, basically, as we would think about it now. And they didn't want to do that because just to the modern eye, because movies haven't been able to be made with Steadicam until about 20 years ago. So to most adult people, that means it's a new modern thing, and they didn't want to do it in the new modern way. But they also wanted to have people moving throughout these rooms where you could see everything they're doing. So the only way they could do it was basically to film the whole room at once. Kind of the Robert Altman technique. Mm-hmm. It's also famous because this is one of the films that used almost entirely natural lighting, even for the nighttime scenes. And I think you can really see that on camera. They're very immersive and believable and sort of do a good balance of giving you an image that looks kind of exciting and spooky at the same time. So, yeah, there was a lot of candle management in this movie. A lot of candle management.
Did anyone catch on fire?
No one caught on fire.
Well done.
Because they spent a lot of time and energy on it. Also, a lot of wax management. With the exception, mainly, of the Badger scene, the women in the movie are wearing almost entirely no makeup at all. And it's the men that are...
You mentioned that before, and I think there are actually several scenes where the women are wearing makeup. I think in the first scene... Sarah is also wearing makeup. When we show Abigail's final victory and debauchery, she's extremely made up.
That's right.
Yeah.
For the most part, there's no makeup on them, and it's actually the men that are walking around with lots of makeup. And that was an intentional decision, partially a commentary on the time and the special nature of this story. Maybe the biggest looks come from Nicholas Hoult, and... when he was first cast and agreed to do the movie, he did not know that he was going to be dressed like that. And he actually had a lot of fun with it. But it was a big shock at first. You Look Like a Badger was in the original script from Deborah Davis.
Great. It survived.
Maybe the other big thing that's been made out of the production of this movie is that Emma Stone really didn't like wearing the corsets. So her quote is, "I had never worn a corset before. It does inform you to the time period. The kind of restriction on women, needing to lace yourself into that, and that you have to stand in a certain way and walk in a certain order to stay upright. Women existed in that for such a long time, which does give you a lot of sympathy for that time and what you are going through. For the first month, I couldn't breathe, and after a month, my organs shifted. It was only temporarily, but it was gross."
Yeah.
Again, your thoughts, Libby.
So, to me, that means the costume department was lacing her too tight. The current feminine beauty ideal is as small as possible because we don't like women and we want there to be less of them. Please have there be less of you. So it sounds like the costume department was trying to make her as small as possible, which means compressing the whole body. This was the mistake I made with my first corset, which was not an early 18th century corset. It was an 1880s corset. An 1880s corset is only supposed to constrict you at the waist. It's not supposed to be constrictive for more than like an inch band of space. So you sort of squish down your stomach either into your hips or into your torso. If you lace in sort of loosely, sit in it for about 2 minutes and then lace in all the way, totally comfortable, totally fine. The early 18th century is doing a more conical silhouette. So you're kind of trying to mash the boobs and make a uniboob. And that's basically, like, you just lace as tight enough to do that. The goal is not to make your waist smaller. That illusion is created by having big skirts. So the corset is there to give you a structure that you can drape the fabric on. It's also there to distribute the weight of the fabric. And also, I'm also curious what kind of furniture Emma Stone was sitting in during her breaks. Because one thing that I've noticed is that modern furniture is designed to not support you. It's designed to let you sort of fully disengage all of your muscles and flop into it. And if you are wearing corsetry when you're doing that, that's very uncomfortable because you're getting a lot of support on your torso and no support on any of your limbs or your head. Your head is a limb. If you sit on hard furniture, which is what they were making in the 17th century, it's actually a lot more comfortable because you're getting an even amount of support across your whole body.
So the corset is almost like the what you lean into, you're telling me.
Yeah, you can sort of like relax and let your corset support you. It also like is necessary to support the garments, which especially for a lady of court would have been too heavy to suspend from your actual body.
So I'm just trying to get this on record because, again, comes up a lot here. You're telling me at this time, aristocratic women wearing well-made corsets, they were fine. They were comfortable and didn't mind.
Yeah. Okay. And in fact, many women, not many, but some women nowadays do wear corsets because they find them more comfortable. Especially if you have costochondritis, which is an inflammation of the tissue between your ribs. A bra can be really uncomfortable, and if you still want breast support, a corset is a much better option because it's going to evenly distribute the weight along your torso. So I believe that Emma Stone was uncomfortable. I think that's because she was laced in too tightly. Maybe the corset didn't fit her, so it was too tight in one place and too loose in another. And she was probably sitting on the wrong furniture.
Let the record show. So filming took place from March to May of 2017. So it was an even shorter shoot than Marie Antoinette, only 45 days. Yeah. And it took even longer after the shoot ended for the movie to come out, over 500 days before it was released. So I think we're just seeing that these types of productions take time. Not necessarily to shoot, but to finalize. The film was released in September of 2018. It was shot on a $15 million budget and went on to make over $80 million. Sorry, over $95 million at the box office. A 539% return on investment, which is very strong, very respectable. And again, we did it. We went to go see the movie at the box office.
$40 of that is ours.
We don't actually see that many movies in the theater. Yeah. They don't show them for free, actually, as it turns out. But we went to see this. We were both very excited. A subject we were both really interested in. A director that's obviously really good, and I'd seen a lot of his movies and loved them. And a story that we just wanted to watch. So they got us. It has a 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 7.5 on IMDb with 244,000 votes.
That's inaccurate.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Film bros, your sexism is showing.
I mean,
or either a combination of your sexism and your lack of appreciation of genuine artistry.
This is an 8.3 or an 8.4 along with Marie Antoinette. Yeah. These are both should be up there, and these numbers are ridiculous. I can't defend them in the slightest. This is one of the most nominated movies in history. Marie Antoinette did okay at the awards. Again, Marie Antoinette was dubbed a failure, so it wasn't allowed to succeed at anything. It did win for Marie Antoinette won for Best Costume Design, and it received nominations at the BAFTAs for Costume Design, Production Design, Makeup, and Hair. So, again, for Marie Antoinette, no one wanted to take the movie seriously. This was just a series of pretty images. Now, The Favorite was nominated for 10 Academy Awards. Now, it only won one, and that was Best Actress for Olivia Colman. This is actually one of the weirder Oscars controversies about who should be nominated for what type of role. Because, as it turned out, Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone were both nominated for Supporting Actress, and Olivia Colman was nominated for Lead Actress. I think we need to break this down strategically a little bit.
In her award ceremony, she said something about, or in her acceptance speech, she said something about, like, it was really all three of us.
Yeah.
I don't know why I got this.
Well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yeah. For what it's worth, Emma Stone has more screen time, 5 or 6 minutes more screen time, and is actually the central character and protagonist of the story. So Emma Stone is actually the lead actress here. I actually think the story structure
is actually kind of interesting, because I think I might describe Abigail as the antagonist, but also the main character. Anyway.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think here's clearly what the situation was. It should have been. They're all leads. And hey, this year, the three of the 5 best actresses happen to all be in the same movie. That doesn't mean you don't nominate them. And you might think it's unfair to the other women who delivered great performances in leading roles that more than half of the nomination spots are being taken up by people from The Favorite. I think it's more unfair to the other women who were in supporting roles who had to go up against Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone, who were in lead roles. In this, like, obviously you can do more with a character when you have more screen time and the plot is more focused on you.
So the reason they, even though I think what you're saying is very good analysis, the reason they didn't win, and the reason it was done this way, is that the Oscars don't have a very good voting system. They have a first past the post voting system. They don't have an approval or range voting system, which they really should have. So they're very concerned about vote splitting. You have to be very careful not to split votes. And so in supporting actress, neither Rachel or Emma won, even though they have a huge advantage over all their competitors because the vote split. And you're not going to win on a split vote. And they didn't want to split the vote for Best Actress. I think they believed, probably truthfully, that if they had submitted all 3 for lead actress, only 1 would have actually gotten a nomination. Maybe 2, but not all 3. So they wouldn't have they wouldn't have been able to sweep the nominations.
I mean, then in that case, I think they got it exactly wrong. I think that Rachel and Emma are leads and Olivia is supporting.
I think you're totally right. And I think they know this. I think Emma Stone was not going to win the Best Actress award.
She was too young and they weren't going to.
Too young, not a weird enough performance, and not a performance that really appeals to the people who vote for Oscars, which are very wealthy 50-year-old white people. That's not really the type of people that Emma Stone's character was trying to connect with. And so what they wanted was they wanted to win an Oscar. And that did work. Olivia Colman won the Oscar and basically had the Oscar locked up from the moment that the movie came out. Everyone knew it. Not really because her performance is better than Rachel Weisz or Emma Stone's, but because she has a character that appeals to Oscar voters, and that's how you have to market your movie.
Yeah, she may have had a technically more difficult time delivering her performance. I know in the last couple of scenes, Anne appears, they don't mention this, but Anne appears to have had a stroke. And so half of her face is sort of melty. Was Olivia doing that all herself? Did they give her...
I don't know what happened there. But I think you're right that Olivia, and I don't mean it's an insult to Olivia at all, Olivia has the most gimmicky performance. And that's what appeals to voters when there's something special about it. I think...
Olivia Colman, to me, I was shocked that she was in this role. And that's part of why I wanted to go see it. I mainly knew her as sort of someone there to play the women in That Mitchell and Webb look. To me, she was in like low budget British comedy series. And I was like, we made her the queen in a big budget blockbuster.
She's played a lot of queens.
Okay.
She's actually kind of known as the queen lady.
Yeah, she has since played Elizabeth II in The Crown. I mean, has she played queens in low budget comedy?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. So... yeah, I think everyone knew what was happening and followed the cynical calculations that the production team was doing, but they did work. And the production team really wanted to say this is an Oscar-winning movie. And I think if they don't do that, that's not going to happen. Is that because there's actually a better screenplay and a better costume designer and a better director and a better film released in 2018? Well, maybe not. But they did know that this was their way to be able to put that blurb on the poster. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, it did a lot better at the BAFTAs.
Yeah.
It's a British movie with a bunch of British people about Britain. So it won for screenplay, production design, costume design. We won for actress, and Rachel won for supporting actress.
I assume Emma was also nominated.
Emma was also nominated. It also won for Best British Film.
That sounds about right. What beat it at the Oscars in cinematography and costume and film?
The simple answer to your question is that this is the Green Book year, where Green Book won for film.
Gosh.
And we've really given it to the Oscars a lot. We don't have to do it again, but yeah, that wasn't actually received that well of a decision. Bohemian Rhapsody was another big winner. That one kind of took a lot of the awards other than the prestigious ones. It was also the year that Roma from Alfonso Cuarón was nominated. That was one received a ton of awards. That one, or nominations. I might have broken the record or tied the record for nominations. So Alfonso won for Best Director. Regina King won Best Supporting Actress for If Beale Street Could Talk, which I haven't seen, so I can't comment on that. Green Book won again for Original Screenplay, and Cinematography went to Roma.
Okay.
Roma's not as good as The Favorite. Mm-hmm. Neither is Green Book. I haven't seen If Beale Street Could Talk, but...
What about costumes?
Costumes went to Black Panther.
Okay.
Yeah, this is really the height of the why don't the Marvel movies win Academy Awards controversy. So I think we might have to give them a little slack on that one.
Yeah, I have seen some of the costumes from Black Panther, and I think they are extremely... It is, in fact, a hard decision to choose between Black Panther and The Favorite for costumes.
I mean, I think Black Panther's costumes are better. I think The Favorite has nice costumes, but I actually think for a costumey costume drama, they do a great job of having good costumes that help tell the story, but don't get in the way of the images. You know better than I about how historically accurate they are. I think they're great, but I don't think they need to be given an award. It is interesting that Sandy Powell, who did the costumes for this movie, was at the same time, while she was making this movie, also doing the costumes for Mary Poppins Returns. And they were literally being filmed in the same studio, and so she could just walk back and forth between the two workspaces doing both movies. And she then got nominated for both movies.
Wasn't The Favorite filmed on location? Or the costume studios were next to each other?
I believe the costuming studios, the production environment were in the same building. So both of the movies that she did the costumes for got nominated, but they both lost to Black Panther. But yeah, Olivia Colman at least had already played Queen Elizabeth in Hyde Park on Hudson.
Okay.
Which is pretty well known.
Yeah, I don't think her role is particularly big in that. So the main thing I remember from the first time I saw this movie was how good it was at getting me to flip-flop between who I was rooting for on about a 20-minute basis. And I think I didn't experience that as much the second time I saw it because I think I knew where we were going. But I sort of really enjoyed being emotionally manipulated and being like, poor Abigail, she's our protagonist. Sarah's so mean. And then we realize what a monster Abigail is.
I mean, Abigail has real problems that deserve to be addressed.
But so Abigail does seem to be this total monster. But then you realize that she like genuinely has never experienced love in her life and doesn't understand that could be an emotion that someone expresses genuinely and selflessly, and that she has to do so much work to, Maslow's hierarchy. She has to do so much work to keep herself safe, and not just being constantly sexually assaulted. That genuine romantic connection is not something that she feels like she has time for, or has time to develop an understanding of.
Do you mean her connection with her spouse or with the Queen? When you said developing a genuine romantic connection.
Well, she doesn't do it with either of them, so.
You were with either. Okay. Yeah, I think that both of these movies do, maybe better than any other movies, a great job of presenting characters that are both very sympathetic and that we don't actually want to win. Mm-hmm. We don't actually want Marie Antoinette and Louis to stay the absolute monarchs of France. We don't want that. But we understand where they're coming from. And I think, so they both are very effective at showing why there was so much anger and why there should be so much anger towards these aristocratic systems and monarchical governments without doing what a lot of movies try to do that, which is present the individuals on the other side of the screen as meaningless monsters who are cruel and selfish without reason and without limit. And that's just not the case here.
I mean, I think Anne, Marie, and Louis all seem to be really unhappy with the fact that they are monarchs as well. Going off my other point about, who are we rooting for? Sarah is genuinely in love, and movies say that we're supposed to support that. Abigail, we sort of can understand why she is the way she is. Can we be mad at Anne then? Is Anne wrong for falling for the fake love and pushing away the real love? But Anne is just so constantly like in physical pain and has really severe depression that it's hard to be mad at her.
Well, she doesn't have anyone in her life other than her rabbits who aren't trying to take advantage of her. Mm-hmm. The rabbits only aren't doing it because they don't know how. So everyone around Anne is using her. And I think that's what the final scene is really supposed to help us understand, is that for a moment there, Anne thought she knew someone that actually cared about her as a person. And then at the end of the movie, she realized that's also still not true. Actually, no one really cares about me. So that's an incredibly sympathetic. And I mean, Anne is the one who does the least bad things in a way. She's obviously incompetent. She makes poor decisions as a monarch.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, sometimes it's not totally clear what is, like, she's genuinely uninformed about an issue that she's being demanded to solve, or she's, like, in too much distress to deal with it. And when she is just like, I don't want to have to do it. When she faints after Harley says, like, you've made such a wise decision, my queen, for deciding not to continue funding this war. And then she's like, oops, I'm holding a bill that says we need to fund this war. I'm going to fall on the ground. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to read that as she actually fainted, or she's like, nah, can't deal.
No, I think we're supposed to read that as she's actually fainted. I think we're supposed to see this as a sign of her continuing health deterioration. I think it's getting worse and worse. I know what you mean, but no, I think we're supposed to buy it. I think these are, again, probably the two best movies that thread the line of being simultaneously aspirational and anti-monarchical. They're movies that let us enjoy the characters trying to establish their own life of luxuries and trying to get their own realms of power, and let us appreciate and enjoy that as natural human desires, but then also show that the systems that allow these situations to arise are making the whole community a bad place for everyone, and aren't really making these people happy in a fundamental way. Like you said, Anne is struggling just with the duties of her queen, and she has all these people around that are very happy to help her and do it for her. And so, to some extent, we might think it's about, isn't great that she has all these helpful people around that want to help her. But the more we get to know these characters, we realize we don't want these people to be monarchs either. If Sarah was the monarch, I think it would be easier to see her being a real tyrant. Someone that will do what she wants and doesn't care who she knocks over to get out of the way, and doesn't seem to have a lot of respect for civil liberties and much else. And then at the end, we realize that Abigail, like you're saying, is actually a monster. This is someone that actually delights in cruelty and isn't interested in thinking about politics, policy, or anything other than her own very short-sighted personal gain. But yeah, it's hard to make characters that are interesting and likable, but not justify the system that those characters are operating in. And both of these movies, it bothers me that there aren't more movies that succeed with bringing this tone about. At least one of these movies was successful and won a lot of awards and people went to see it. So you'd think there'd be more movies that try to approach similar historical issues in the same way. So if anyone knows what they are, please suggest them to me, because I can't find them.
Yeah. Well, it's been 7 years since The Favorite came out, so maybe maybe we're cresting on that wave of people being, having had the time to make a film. It's like, ooh, we should do more like The Favorite. So 2025 is going to be a big year for them.
5 more years. So 2006 to 2018, that's 12 years.
Okay.
So
Marie Antoinette flopped, so no one saw Marie.
I see.
The industry didn't see Marie Antoinette and go, we need to do more like that. But they did see The Favorite do really well, and everyone loved it, except for these idiots on IMDb. And so now people in the industry are like, ooh, this is what we should be doing.
The cycle is accelerating. Yeah, I think it wouldn't be... I don't know how many people would go see it, but I'd love to see, 2 companion movies. One about, the past history where... Anne basically totally gives in to Sarah and just lets Sarah run the country, and
an alternate history.
Yeah, she has alternate history where Anne just gives in to Sarah, and Sarah is able to actually carry out all the constant violent threats that she keeps making to everyone around her. And another version where Abigail ends up having complete control, and Anne doesn't constrain her at all, and then the court descends into sociopathy, as you're saying. Sociopathy. Thank you. So there's just so many interesting characters and ideas in this movie that it does a great job of leaving me wanting more.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the very last shot? Because when we watched it the first time, we talked about that a lot when we were leaving the theaters. And we were like, what was that? I think the shots of Anne being miserable and having doomed herself to a life with this person that she hates and that she's just realized hates her. Abigail realizing that she has technically gotten what she wants, but at a price that she didn't think she was going to have to pay, and that she is not actually that excited about paying. And then we got all of the shots of the rabbits, which are sort of Anne's representatives of all of her dead children. What's with the shots of all the rabbits sort of superimposing and then the shots of the two women dissolving into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very beautiful to look at. It's incredibly arresting. I think that's a fact. I think from a story perspective, I think we're supposed to be given the feeling that, like, we're leaving in the middle of the action. The story's not over, and they don't want us to feel like, well, that's the end of it. Abigail won. Abigail doesn't win. There's going to be another chapter to this. So I think that's why we aren't actually given a resounding ending to the story. And I think if there is a clear message to that collage that we see at the end, I think it's kind of about Anne's the centrality of power in Anne. Kind of making the point that Anne is still in charge. And that's what the theme of the final scene is about. So Anne is still in charge. And so the feeling that we're meant to leave with is that the court and the country and their relationships are still being controlled fundamentally by the subconscious pain that Anne is feeling. And we spent most of the movie, unlike what the Oscars would tell you, focused on these two different rival favorites and their battles for power. But what we maybe should leave realizing is that it actually was Anne that was in charge the whole time. Anne is in charge, and Anne is going through some things right now. And I think we're seeing the inside of Anne's mind. And just as you say, the rabbits representing her children, consuming everything that she thinks about and everything that she's feeling is being experienced through that lens or through that maze of rabbits.
Now she's just stuck in this room with the ghosts of all her dead children.
Exactly right. And to show that, though obviously Anne is like literally mad at Abigail at this moment, that this has also not solved any of Anne's problems. So I think it's, again, we get to experience the aspirational storyline for so much of the movie. And so I think the ending is there to cut hard against that and to show that nobody actually is going to... I mean, I guess we don't get to see Abigail's eventual downfall, but in theory, she's supposed to be doing pretty well at the end of the movie. But I think we want to...
Well, fiscally.
Yeah, we want to recenter on Anne's pain and show that Anne's pain is actually the central driving force of the story. And, if you look back on the movie, all these machinations and they keep coming up with these schemes that sometimes work and sometimes don't work. And ultimately what it comes down to is like, how is Anne feeling today? Is her digestive system working? Is she able to maintain contact with reality? The movie is called The Favorite. And it's about being the favorite of a queen. And I don't think it wants us to escape the theater thinking that it's actually a story about something else. That's the beginning and that's the end.
So based on some things that you said, I have formulated a new question. Do you think Sarah is genuinely in love with Anne?
I think that's the big mystery of the film.
Oh, to me, the answer is very clearly yes. I mean,
why do you say that?
Well, Sarah is... one of the big differences they draw between Sarah and Abigail is that Sarah is willing to stay up all night and, hold Anne's hand while she suffers through her gout. And, she doesn't mind sacrificing her own nice time to take care of this person that she loves. And also when she says, when she comes back after she's been knocked out, and Abigail makes her whole speech about, like, I've won, stop trying to fight me. We can just sort of hang out. You can just be a normal duchess and I get to be the favorite. And Sarah says, if you think you've won, then we're playing very different games. Because her game is she actually loves Anne.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate interpretation. But I actually think most of the movie pushes against that, including that very line that you're mentioning. I think for most of the movie, we're given the impression that Sarah really cares about the country. And to some extent, her husband, who is in very much harm's way without the intervention of the country. So, Sarah is a Whig. She believes in limited monarchy, perhaps for good reason, meaning what we would call a liberal, a leftist, for lack of a better term. So Sarah has real political goals for the country. She wants to see a reform of the monarchy. She wants to see France defeated in the War of Spanish Succession. And she wants her husband to come home. Those are her goals. And so I think that's at least... at the beginning, I think that maybe Sarah does love Anne, but then maybe we're less... Because when she doesn't seem to have really, I might say, a deep affection for Anne. Now, you can have a love where you don't really care for the other person necessarily so much.
I do think that
like the other person that much.
At this point in the film, or at this point when the film is set, it seems like Anne would be a very difficult person to love. You know, she's not. What about her is appealing? Not a lot.
Take that, Anne.
Sorry. You know, if you got really severe depression and gout, I understand that you need to work on yourself first and not worry about making yourself appealing to other people, especially when they legally have to like you anyway. But frequently, Sarah will talk about when they were children, and it seems like they've known each other for decades. And so it's much more believable that they fell in love like when they were teenagers or in their 20s. Another thing that I think is interesting, given that I was interpreting Sarah as being genuinely in love with Anne, is that she also seems to like her husband. And it was interesting to see what is either a bisexual polyamorous character or a lesbian or someone who is just in love with a woman who still has a like positive, pleasant relationship with her husband, even if they're not in love. I feel like a lot of times if you're doing a lesbian story and one of them is married, the man has to be the villain. And Marlborough is almost not in the film, but he's certainly not a villainous character.
Yeah, I think this is a very... I think Yorgos wants us to not know the answer to this question of, is Sarah actually sexually or romantically connected to Anne, and her relationship with the Duke is a bit of a show, even if they're good friends or whatever? Or is it the opposite? Maybe she's honestly straight and she's not actually into Anne and she's just doing that to get power. I know that's not appealing to the modern audience. That's not what we want to hear, but it is a possible...
Well, I mean, that's what Abigail's doing, so...
I'll take your word for it. I don't know. Do you think so? You think Abigail's straight?
Well, I mean, one thing that we have to say is that in the early modern period, people didn't have the concept of heterosexual and homosexual. So did Abigail think of herself as straight? Absolutely not. There was much less identification as your identity, as we would call it now, and you were identified by the things that you did. So if someone did like define homosexual to Lady Abigail Masham, she would have been like, yes, I am a homosexual. I have had sex with a woman.
Sure. So I don't think we can answer the question about, does Sarah really care about Anne? In part because, as you said, for her own practical reasons of the fact that she lives in an absolute monarchy, and for her own very clear political and familial goals, she has to have this relationship with Anne. And she has to at least make it seem like they really care about each other and they love each other. And she says that she loves her. So, maybe Sarah isn't that worried about this decision. Maybe Sarah doesn't really need to pick which one that she really loves, or maybe both or neither or whatever. I think Sarah is kind of playing it by ear. I mean, in real history, there's no evidence of a sexual relationship between Anne and Sarah. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. In real history, she had a very famously romantic and sexual relationship with the Duke. So, based on that real history and the way she behaves even in very private moments, I think the one thing we know is she has a deep affection for her spouse, whether that's sexual or whatever, which I guess we might assume. I don't know. But she really, really does care for him and really does want him to come home.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna ascribe mercenary elements to her relationship with Anne. If you're a duchess and your husband dies, that is bad for you.
Good point.
You stop being a duchess. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she had a son who would have inherited, and she would have been the dowager duchess. In which case, she is reliant on her son to not kick her out of the house, which he probably wouldn't have done. But he might, if they have an equally nice but smaller house, she's probably going to go live in that house. Or if she didn't have a son, then it's going off to some like cousin or nephew of her husband's.
That's a good point.
She quite likely had equally... I mean, she did also have the title of Privy Purse, so she did have a job, In
the first half of the movie.
Yeah. So kind of once her economic status is threatened, then she needs Marlborough to stay alive.
Maybe that is the answer. Yeah, I think that's true. So, Sarah is trying to get stuff done here. She's not like Abigail. She has goals outside of her own gain. That's the one thing the movie does let us know. And so, I think those goals shroud her feelings. And the whole point is that she's very goal-oriented. She's very task-oriented, and she's not going to get all sentimental about everything. So, it's hard to guess what her sentiment really is.
Yeah, I'd like to see some interviews with Rachel Weisz about this. To see if she describes the character she was playing as being in love with Anne. Rachel Weisz, who is currently assumed to be straight. To what extent does that mean anything? Very little. But she has become famous for starring in 2 like back-to-back lesbian films, this one and Disobedience.
One of those movies was better than the other.
One of those movies was better than the other. She has talked about being very excited about like presenting stories about women who love each other on film. So I think Rachel Weisz does think that Sarah is genuinely in love with the Queen and is some flavor of Sapphic.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the answer to this question separately from Rachel, Yorgos, Tony, and Deborah. Tony McNamara is the screenwriter that was brought in after Deborah, and he now has a very close relationship with Yorgos. He's his American screenwriter. Yeah, I'd love to hear the answer for all these things without letting them. Let's allow everybody discuss it with each other beforehand, because I think we get very different answers.
Do you think Yorgos has a different answer?
I think Yorgos is on the mystery point, and again, I think I see that very much in his cinematography and the structure.
I'll just say it never even occurred to me that there was an interpretation other than Sarah genuinely being in love with the Queen until we started doing this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, but I really like how you highlighted that line where she says to Abigail, "If you think you've won, we're playing very different games." Because maybe it is about what's good for Anne as very much as a person, but maybe it's about in fact I think in that particular line Sarah is talking about because it's right before and after these big political scenes, so it is about the political and military conflict that's going on, and Sarah is like, okay, you think you won and you're going to be the favorite, we'll see how that works out, but like you are going to like give the country over to tyrannical conservatives and get my husband killed, and then we're going to lose the war. And now the wrong Habsburg will be in charge of Spain. We can't have that. I think that's what she means in that line.
Yeah, I think that because Abigail is presented as so mercenary, the point of that line is to draw a contrast to a position that is not mercenary. Like, if what you've described is Sarah playing the same game as Abigail. Well, like, I'm just trying to get as much political control as I can.
Abigail doesn't care about political control.
She does care about political control so that she can remain powerful. She likes being the privy purse, getting her own salary. She likes being able to choose who she gets to marry. She likes being able to live at court and tell other people what to fucking do.
But that's not political control. She doesn't care what Nicholas Hoult does about redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, I just think that the
What's Nicholas Holt's name?
Harley.
Harley, thank you.
That game is way closer to the game that you attribute to Sarah than an actual game of hearts, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I am putting Sarah and Abigail closer together than your interpretation. And it might be nice for the story to really have a very strong separation between these two characters. That's a fair point. And maybe that is the intention or the best way to read it. I just don't actually know that it matches either Sarah's real behavior or the structure of the story as we're being presented to it on a scene-by-scene basis. So,
I mean, I think there are several scenes that we are meant to interpret as Sarah being genuinely nice to the Queen. Like, we see lots of scenes where Godolphin and Harley are, like, artificially being nice to her to get her to do what they want. I mentioned the scene where Sarah stays up all night because Anne's gout is painful. And I think the movie at the beginning sort of portrays Sarah as mean. One of the first things she says is, "You look like a badger." But she is willing to say, like, do you want to go fast in the wheelchair after the ball? She pushes her around. Like,
she knows what Anne really likes.
She knows what Anne really likes. And, I mean, if you want to, you could read all of those elements as cynical, and that Sarah is trying to manipulate Anne, and she just happens to be better at it than everybody else. But I think that given how much work Lanthimos does to portray the way Harley and Godolphin interact with her as artificial praise, and how much you can't possibly mistake that as genuine, that what he's doing, he is trying to do something different with Sarah.
Yeah, I do think there's an interesting angle here where part of it is that, again, when Abigail is controlling Anne, Abigail doesn't care about politics or anything else. So she doesn't really care about taking care of Anne or taking care of the country. She's happy to just let Anne help. And I think we're kind of given the impression, pretty subtly, that part of the reason we see Anne have so many health problems in the later of the movie with the stroke or whatever else it is kind of implied because Abigail isn't taking care of her. And Abigail isn't supervising her diet and all these other things that Sarah was doing. And so when Abigail is in control, because she doesn't care about anything other than her own personal gain, she's not responsibly managing the household or the country or Anne. When Sarah is in control, she is responsibly managing the household and, to some extent, the country and Anne. And maybe that's because she really cares about Anne. Maybe that's because she really cares about the household. Maybe it's because she really cares about the country. But, like, when Sarah is in charge, all of her goals are benefited, maybe sentimental goals, but her practical goals are benefited from things being taken care of, and Abigail just doesn't care.
So maybe I just have an unfalsifiable position. What do you think the film could have done to demonstrate that Sarah is genuinely in love with Anne? What do you think it could have actually done to do it and leave no room for it to be like, oh, she's just trying to stay in power?
Well, Sarah would have to try to get Anne to do something that doesn't benefit Sarah's goals. Like, you could have had a scene where Anne is like, okay, I will go save the division to save the Duke in France, but then I'll have to sacrifice one of my rabbits. This is a terrible example. And then Sarah could have been like, okay, well, no, I guess don't do that because that'll make you sad. So I won't
I'm confused about what the proposition is.
That doesn't really make any sense. I'm just trying to go from it on a purely sentimental level. Let me try again.
Yeah, I think the least appealing thing about Sarah is that she seems to genuinely not really like the rabbits. Anne keeps telling her, like, kiss the rabbits, good morning. And she's like, gross.
Well, she's busy.
So, I don't know if Sarah's like, I wish you would stop thinking so much about your dead children and think more about me, your girlfriend. The contrast, the foiling done with Abigail there is that Sarah will be upfront with the fact that she doesn't like the rabbits, but will still, give them a little pat on the head. Whereas Abigail's like, oh my God, your precious rabbits. And then she steps on them.
Yeah, so maybe a better example that actually is in the script is like the bill to raise the tax. And so if we had a scene where Anna's like, look, I really don't want to raise the tax. It really doesn't make me uncomfortable. I think it's going to be bad for me as a queen. I don't want to do it.
I mean, I don't think Anne would ever do that because I don't think she understands enough about how the government works.
I think this is the one thing that she does understand.
Okay.
She does take that position. She's not good at articulating her position, so I know exactly what
I think she does that because she's been manipulated by Harley and Abigail at that point to do it. And to a certain extent because she gets a little bit mad at Sarah.
Yeah, that's why she ends up going against the tax. But Sarah is constantly trying to push her into the tax, and Anne doesn't really want to do it. Now, Anne doesn't really have a particularly good reason for not wanting to do it. Actually, maybe she does, but not reasons that she understands. And so, if we had maybe had in that moment some moment where Sarah was like, this really benefits my political goals, but it's going to make Anne sad and make things worse for her. Well, then I guess we don't have to do it this time, Anne. Even though it would be good for me, and I could probably get you to do it, I just won't do it, because I love you. But there are no moments like that.
Yeah, I think that moment would be impossible given that we have this characterization of an Anne who is incompetent with regards to governance and frequently doesn't really understand it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
You'd have to sacrifice some of that characterization, which I think was really important.
Well, or you're going to have to add another story element. Mm-hmm. I think you're right that there needs to be kind of this triangle of what Sarah wants, what Anne wants, and something that could be that Sarah could sacrifice that Anne actually cares about. And Anne is just too out of touch to make those types of decisions. So I see that's why it's hard. But I do think at the same time, the story is intentionally set up this way so that we can't have this answer. Again, I see how it would be very heartwarming to at least feel like, well, Anne and Sarah really love each other. But then that's not Lance and both movies are not supposed to be heartwarming.
Well, I think they do make it clear at the end that Anne does really love Sarah, which I think lends credence to the idea that Sarah also genuinely loves her.
Do you mean because she gets mad at Abigail?
No, because she's so distressed about the letters not showing up.
Oh.
I think she realizes that she made a mistake in banishing Sarah from court.
Yeah.
And then she thinks, well, she's going to write. And so she starts yelling at people about where the mail is.
Yeah.
And then we find out that Sarah was writing to her and Abigail was burning the letters.
Yeah, I think Anne loves Sarah and Abigail. Again, these are the only people in her life who are at least pretending to really care about her.
Yeah, well, I think Anne does love Sarah, and this is part of my argument to indicate that Sarah is also in love with Anne. It's reciprocal. Because maybe Anne is at some point in love with Abigail. She certainly thinks Abigail is hot and likes how deferential she's being. But by the end, Anne certainly is not in love with Abigail. She realizes... She stops being in love with her because she realizes that Abigail is not genuinely in love with her and is just using her.
Right. I think that is true. I think at the beginning of the movie, Anne loves Sarah. In the middle of the movie, Anne loves both. There's a brief period where she only loves Abigail, and then she goes back to loving Sarah. I think Anne's emotional attachments are pretty clear. Mm-hmm. I think Abigail's emotional attachments are clear. She doesn't care. She's just trying not to get back to the streets. Maybe have a nice party. Sarah's emotions... I don't think we can answer that question. I think the film goes out of its way to prevent us from being able to answer that question.
Okay. I disagree. Let's move on to something that I think we can agree on. There's several roles that I wish could have been combined in this film so that we could have a very clear best cameo nominee. Because I think any of the shots where someone interacts with a footman are so funny and delightful. So there's early on, you get Anne is walking past a footman and the, look at me, don't look at me, how dare you? That's hilarious. I love when Sarah has gone missing and Anne says, find her, someone go looking for her. And there's a footman who's being ordered to do this, but he clearly doesn't know how to search in a forest. So he just has his lantern or his candelabra and he sort of looks around the room. Is she here? All of the footman interactions are A+ comedy.
Well, I think this actually saves us for best cameo because if these roles had been combined into a single role, that would be a supporting role. They'd be in way too many scenes.
Oh, that's true. They would be in too many scenes.
So the good news is now you can pick your favorite one.
Now I just have to pick my favorite. Oh, that's so hard.
Congrats.
All best cameo is going to be all favorite footmen.
No, if there's one thing we've learned from the favorite, it's that you have to nominate each of them separately, and then fortunately we only have two voters.
We have ranked choice voting.
We don't have ranked choice voting.
We don't have first
we
past
only
the
have
post
two.
voting.
We kind of do. We only have two voters, so we can't split votes. The first footman scene, the "Look at me, don't look at me" one. I think it's a very well executed sequence. It's very cliche. I mean, that's something that I feel like I've seen in a lot of costume dramas. Basically exactly as it went down.
I think Olivia Colman does a better job delivering the line than is typically done. I think because she has a big comedy background.
Yeah, we do get a chance to see Olivia's comedy shine through. I think that Emma Stone is a bit shortchanged, I think, in this movie, because I don't think she's actually given that much to do. Her character ends up being kind of one-dimensional, which is fine for the story, but I think it's tough for her as the protagonist where she is the protagonist and the villain, but her character's not actually that interesting.
I would describe her as the antagonist main character.
Character and the antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that her actions provoke the movement of the plot, but her actions are so violently and worsening of the status quo. That wasn't grammar, but you figured it out. That is hard to describe her as a protagonist.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about.
It depends on whether you're defining the protagonist as the advancer of the action and the antagonist as the halter of the action, or the protagonist as the one taking positive action.
It's interesting to think about this movie in terms of the arc of Emma Stone's career. Where now Emma Stone may go down as the actress of our generation, as the most prominent, successful, and artistically rich actress of our generation. And that definitely wasn't how she was seen in 2018.
Yeah.
She was kind of just like a fun hot lady, basically, who was good at acting.
But she was in a lot of sort of goofy, rom-com or even more exploitative things.
True. And so here we see her starting to really take on this more serious role, maybe not being given a lot to do there, but wow, she really took it and ran with it. And her partnership with Lanthimos is done a lot for that. Yeah.
And I wonder if the fact that, Abigail's interaction and commentary on her own exploitation is in any way a commentary on Emma Stone and the more exploitative movies she had been in the past.
I think it's maybe easy for everyone, including Emma, to feel good about that casting decision for these reasons. I do think we can see a very natural comparison to there. I mean, if you've seen Poor Things, you can have your own interpretation of its relationship to Emma Stone's career. But Yorgos Lanthimos might be the most prominent and successful director of our times, and from a purely artistic perspective, not from a commercial perspective. And the same might be true for Emma Stone. And it really starts here.
So we watched Marie Antoinette and then The Favorite. David, do you feel like that is the right order?
I think this one's pretty hard to call. Obviously they're not in historical, chronological order.
Yes.
And there is actually a little bit of interaction between the stories, but I don't think you need that to appreciate them.
Yeah, I think because I knew so much about the economic situation of France in Marie Antoinette and how it was affected by the events of The Favorite, I was able to appreciate that, but it's not information that you need for comprehension.
I think Marie Antoinette, from its conception, is intended to be a aggressively accessible movie. That was the point. How do we take this famous story that people find inaccessible and make it accessible? Whereas The Favorite, the point is to make an artsy movie. How do we take a story that other people would make as kind of a standard drama and spice it up, put some really cool looking titles in there.
Be a little weird. Make the titles kind of... I didn't have that much difficulty with the titles, but when we got to the credits at the end of the film, I found those practically unreadable. Now, I do have dyslexia, so that probably makes it harder for me. But I was just like, hot damn, can I not read these words?
I mean, I think the titles are so gorgeous to look at and do so much to set the tone of the story. I really like how the titles they gradually make it obvious that the titles are quotes from the script.
Yeah.
In the first half, you get these titles, and if you're not watching carefully, you won't notice the quotes from the script, and you'll think they're just kind of chapter titles. But then, I believe the sort of turning moment is when Sarah is in the brothel, and we hear the prostitute say, fights infection. That's when that was the title I just saw a minute ago. And then kind of from that point on, now you know to expect it, and they put it there in a more obvious and kind of big picture way. So I love that technique. So, Marie Antoinette, supposed to be accessible. Favorite, kind of supposed to be artsy. I guess it kind of makes sense to watch the accessible one first, get access, and then do the artsy one.
Warm up your artistic eye.
And Marie Antoinette is a bit more fun, but has kind of a sad ending. The Favorite has a more consistent tone throughout. Mm-hmm. So... which is both funnier and less fun. So maybe, I do think probably Marie Antoinette first. Have your fun, have your story arc, do the arc. Now we can kind of pick up from the end tone of Marie Antoinette and just ride that tone throughout The Favorite. So it's a bit efficient in that way.
Yeah, The Favorite sort of picks up on the tone of Marie Antoinette, but then injects a lot of dark humor into it.
That's
so
right.
It'll sort of make you feel better about how sad you feel. I will say, when we were watching Marie Antoinette, I was surprised that the final shot was the final shot. Because, obviously a lot more things happened in Marie Antoinette's life. And I was like, wow, it's about to get real sad, y'all. Yeah, are you ready?
I think everybody kind of knows what happens. Actually, they don't know the details of what happens next, but they know the important parts of what happened next. Yeah, I mean, I think... And
I actually think, going back to just talking about Marie Antoinette, I think I would have liked it better if we had maybe started, 2 scenes later and not done any Austria sections, or just done that in voiceover, so that the story is Marie Antoinette's time at Versailles.
I agree with you, but I'm one scene behind you. I think the story should begin at her arrival in France, and the story is her time in France, because those introduction scenes...
Well, she stays in France after she just moves to Paris after...
Oh, I see, from the ending perspective. Well, the beginning of the story should begin at her arrival in France. I don't think the scene with her mother is needed, and I think it's too cliche. So I think we could show her arriving at the border, and that's a very fun and beautiful scene that I would hate to lose.
Yeah, I'm fine with her staying at the border, and then we can establish that, this marriage is necessary to make peace, either with a Maria Theresa voiceover, or have the ambassador say something.
Just have the aunts say something witty about it. That'll be fine. I think it'll be fine.
No one listens to the
Also,
aunts.
Does anyone really care that this marriage is necessary to restore peace? Everybody knows it's necessary because royal people have to get married and have alliances. They don't really care about the historical
I think
context.
That's letting you know that France historically hates Austria, which is part of the prejudice against... There are good reasons to dislike Marie Antoinette. People also disliked her for bad reasons, like she was Austrian.
Well put.
And they also disliked her for fully fictional reasons.
Right.
Like, this film didn't mention at all the affaire du collier, the affair of the necklace.
For the best.
But yeah, it's you can't just address it in one scene.
Well,
it's
they did a movie about
they
it.
They made a whole different movie
good.
about it. Yeah. Yeah. So people, I think we needed to have some amount of people dislike her for just dumb reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I think the movie wants us to think people dislike her just because people at Versailles are mean, and that might be enough. But I think
I don't object to characters being made more nuanced.
Yeah, I think the thing about Marie Antoinette is that Marie Antoinette has a life that's not actually that long in years, but very long in events.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen to Marie Antoinette, and part of what's so hard to tell the story is that when Marie and Louis first meet, they're like 15 years old.
Yeah.
They're not 25 like they look in this movie. And when Marie Antoinette is executed, she's 35 or 36 or something. Mm-hmm. So that's 20 years of her life at Versailles. And in that story of her real life, she's a very different person. Everyone wants to talk about Marie Antoinette's so innocent and so naive, which is very true about Marie Antoinette for the first 15 years of her life, when she did receive a lot of abuse, even though she was a very inactive person. For the second 10 decade of her reign, she was a very politically active person and was very involved in all the political goings-on around the issues that caused the revolution. So I think the movie has to do and does do a good job of striking a balance of just showing Marie as kind of a normal person living a normal life, and doesn't push really hard into the tone of, oh, this poor little girl, why was everyone so mean to her? Or, oh, actually she did kind of become a tyrant at the end of it. So they're not worried about that story, and we really are focused on Marie as a person. She probably didn't think that she was a very different person when she was 15 and 35, and so we get to see it from her perspective.
So that's it for our Sad Queens. David, what films are we talking about next month?
Next month, it is The Tales of Hoffmann from 1951 and The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and 3 more from 2023 or 2024, but we'll get into it. From recently, the recent one.
Yeah, these are the 4 Roald Dahl adaptations done by Wes Anderson. First one called The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. I don't remember what the other ones are called. There's something about a rat in there. So you may find these separately, or you may find them together under the title The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar and 3 more from 2024. I will also make a note about Tales of Hoffmann. So this is an opera. It was originally written in French. This film is using an English translation. I highly recommend you watch it with subtitles, because even though it's in English, it is difficult to understand. So make sure that option is available to you.
Yeah, this if you don't have a lot of experience with opera, it's not just you as someone who doesn't watch a lot of opera that can't really understand what everyone's saying when they're singing it. That is kind of how you're supposed to do it, actually.